Hey guys, CP here from Will I Like It Reviews. Me and Lee did a video a couple weeks back and we decided all the stuff that we cut out, we're gonna put it back in. We're gonna make a really long doc, so to speak. I'm going to start the video off and talk about certain things.
And I'll poke in periodically throughout the film and finish it off.
Also, I should be piping in a little bit towards the end with Lee's stuff. So, with all that said, please enjoy this extended edition. Please note that if you've seen the original, it's all here. It's not like it's just the deleted scenes. This is an extended cut. It's stuff you've seen already. And if you're new to this, it's a long journey. There are shorter versions if you don't want to watch all of this. Thank you for your time. Let me ask you a question. This Halloween, who are you dressing up as? Better yet, what is it that a child you know fears most? My best guess is neither answer was a horror film character. That's quite sad to me because the answer to both questions, for me at least, growing up was Jason Voorhees, the bad guy from the Friday the 13th films. It wasn't strictly me either. Some people had Freddy, some people had Michael Myers. The obscure ones went for Chucky, things like that. The point is, they were superstars as far as horror is concerned. They managed to transcend the little small cult community that is horror films and were actually mainstream mainstays. Kids weren't afraid of some imaginary purple monster. They had a vivid image and story behind what they feared. They could recite you things that the character did to instill that fear. It wasn't just, oh, I'm afraid of under my bed. It was, I don't want to go near the closet because I saw in a movie Michael Myers hidden there and got that girl.
I saw it with my own eyes and I can show you myself.
Admittedly, when talking about the superstars of horror, they tend to have phases in which they get very prominent, very big, then things kind of get out of hand, and then people start growing tired of everything. As far as horror is concerned, we're still in a bit of a lull right now. In today's horror, scary movies are associated with a house that's haunted, a camera that picks something up, generic faceless ghosts that magically appear and take on different images to fear. A shaky camera just generically shooting and somehow getting something that pops up and scares you. You're not sure if you're supposed to be afraid, but the noise you heard shocked you a bit. Now, I'm not here to say modern horror is bad. In fact, I think films like It Follows and The Conjuring show incredible promise for the genre. They still lack that thing, however, that gets people recognizing the respective mascots. A genuine villain, an anti-hero. But in horror's case, they'd be considered heroes for bringing it all back to the glory phases. Before I go any further, please note I'm going to start with the sound era of film. If we're gonna have a savior in today's day and age, characters like Nosferatu just wouldn't cut it with their restricted toolkit of the early 20th century. Universal's Monsters was our first true wave of heroes of horror. 1931 was a truly groundbreaking year, as we were handed two pillars for the horror landscape. The first, Bela Lugosi's Dracula, an intriguing character to be the embodiment of why we fear infinite life, with undertones and motifs of sexuality. The stay pure until you're married theme can be traced right back to this character, in leading so many fears about virginity and giving it up too soon, and obviously to the wrong person. Dracula also embodied the pure greed and lust a person could have. He was a true anti-hero, but he had a face. He had characteristics. They were unique. He wasn't just walking around looking scary. He could have been charming at times. He could have been scary at times. There were levels to him, and it was an incredible start to modern horror. We would also get another legendary character in 31 in Frankenstein. Frankenstein was there just to show us why we should fear death and why we should fear the dead. Death in general. He wasn't just a zombie. He was the zombie. For every episode of The Walking Dead, for every last second of a Romero flick, you best call Universal Pictures and say thank you for the world's first and greatest depiction of a zombie, Frankenstein. Frankenstein's actor actually multitasked and gave us two horror icons. Karloff was the actor in the Frankenstein suit and would later end up playing the Mummy. Frankenstein was a big, towering figure that was a walking, grunting reason to fear death. 1941 gave us Wolfman, which gave us another perspective perspective of what to fear, and also a unique twist on the Jekyll and Hyde tale. This was that was a walking, talking character that was as real looking as any image you'd see on a screen, and had us exploring different reasons to fear these intense characters, and even a change of pace for those with differing tastes. We were fearing our own bodies this time with the Wolfman entry. Then in '54, the creature from the Black Lagoon gave us reason to fear the water. Yes, I said it, before Jaws, there was a creature of the Black Lagoon that gave us reason to kind of be hesitant. But suddenly, now we had choices in fear, and that was the best part. We had mascots, we had heroes, or at least horror did. Something you could point to and have your counterpart understand just what it was you were afraid of. Not some generic fear in your head. The folks at Universal were the architects of fear. They gave us unique characters to fear, unique characters to love. Not just generalizations of what could be. I'm doing this way too much, aren't I? It was around this time that Alfred Hitchcock started to give us some real scary stories to truly be afraid of. The monsters of the previous generation came off as a bit silly. Suddenly, why would we fear some sludgy man from the swamp? Hitchcock not only gave us great story, he furthered the distance between realistic and a sort of dark fairy tale. Hitchcock himself would be the mascot this time. For over a decade, movies like Psycho, The Birds, would give us reasons to fear regular people, or regular animals. Rosemary's Baby later on in the 60s would further extend our fears, without really showing us anything. As far as heroes are concerned, this could be considered a lull in horror. The stories were too realistic. However far-fetched they were too grounded in realism. Thankfully, we started to get the best of both generations in the 70s, taking from the mascot theme of Universal's monsters, and literally hand-picking elements of the Ed Gein story, and just enough to label it based on a true story. 1974's Texas Chainsaw Massacre cracked the concrete wall that had been built by the horror fans of the public. Incredibly, a simple painted-over William Shatner mask would break through that wall.
Tommy Lee Wallace, at the time he was a production designer, he was assigned to go out and find a mask. They didn't know what kind of mask they were going to use. The movie was shot in April, I believe, so there were no Halloween masks out. So the only masks he found were a William Shatner mask and a clown mask. And so he goes into this room and he tries on the clown mask first. He comes out and they're like, yeah, that's kind of creepy. Yeah, we might be able to go with that. Everybody hates clowns. But then he comes out with this. We all know he comes out with the iconic William Shatner mask, but he had teased up the hair and he spray painted the face. From the words of Tommy Lee Wallace, a chill went down everybody's spine when they saw that mask. And from that second, they knew this guy was going to be an icon. When you have a mask like that that can automatically cause a reaction of fear, then you know you're onto something.
These things about these masked characters like Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, there is this shroud of mystery. You never see their face. Sometimes you'll see Jason or Michael's briefly, but for the most part, there is this mystery, and that's what keeps you going. You're afraid of him because you don't know what's beyond the mask. You don't know what's going on behind that mask. 1978's Halloween featured the mask on the film's killer, Michael Myers, and there suddenly was a true star once again. I'm being a bit comic with my comment, of course. The film itself certainly worked wonders in helping create a subgenre within horror, and the slasher film was brought to the mainstream. But sure enough, this mute character was identified by that painted-over Shatner mask, which would now be known as the Michael Myers mask. The main issue that kept the Texas Chainsaw Massacre character from mainstream was the fact that perhaps it was a little too far over the line. The killer's mask in the film was made of human flesh. As a viewing public, we don't mind being scared, but there's a line to what exactly we'll put up on our bodies. It may have been a bit much for people of that day. 1980 would bring us to the beginning of the Friday the 13th franchise. The interesting thing about our next star is A, he would not even be prominently featured in the first film of the series, and B, he didn't truly have his image until the third film of the series, where grabbing a simple hockey mask went from taking a successful horror film into stepping into superstar franchise icon. If you recall, the original, it was just a Halloween ripoff. It's a ripoff on so many levels. They admitted to copying Halloween, they admitted to copying Carrie for the ending. But here we are, a movie that stands on its own and didn't really get its true character until the sequel. So it's just proof that you can plan certain things out, but people like what they like. It just happens sometimes. And with Friday the 13th, they got lucky.
Jason, he dons the hockey mask in part 3. And is the hockey mask scary? No, not really. But the big thing about Jason is the character himself. He is an anti-hero. If there was ever a great anti-hero for slashers, it's Jason.
There are plenty of reasons why people fall in love with certain characters or get behind certain characters. But as far as the slasher series is concerned, Friday the 13th appears to have a couple of beacons of why people get behind certain things. The story behind the original Friday the 13th, it's about a mom who's avenging her son's death. Anybody can understand that. A mom who's experienced a horrible loss and feels like she needs to exact revenge, if only for her son's sake. People can understand Pamela Voorhees. People don't condone it, but you understand it. And again, the escapism of it all, if you've ever felt unjustified at any point, people can cling to her. Yeah, she's doing it for me. And then on the flip side, you can understand a boy who witnessed his mother die, who's now just flip-flopping and avenging his mother's death. You can understand that.
Because we can all sympathize for him. He was a kid that was neglected. And if you really think about it, all his victims are people that he envies, or even some of us might envy. You know, it's usually the jock or the really pretty girl that's probably the cheerleader. And everybody can relate to that. I think that immediately caught on with people. And he looks really freaking cool.
1984 brought us an incredible new character that was begging to exist. And finally we had a face to go with the fears that go as far back as humankind itself. The star and embodiment of our dream fears now belong to Freddy Krueger. Nightmare on Elm Street was the stuff of the best of everything that worked so well in horror. We had a not so human looking bad guy who existed in a world that wasn't exactly the real world, but in the same breath, he did exist in our dreams, which is a manifestation of our real lives. It was everything you'd expect and or want a horror film to be. Extravagance in showing us that this isn't the real world. But in the same light, it was associated with an act that connected us to the real world. It had a reason to be so extravagant. You were sleeping. It was the dream world. And we all sleep. We all dream. Well, most of us dream.
Freddy is a direct personification of our nightmares. And who can't relate to the boogeyman in your nightmares? That's the time when you see the boogeyman. So Wes Craven really captured a moment there that everybody can relate to. And Freddy is just such a cool looking horror icon. He's got gloves with the knives, his face is all burnt up, sweater is iconic. I mean, everything about him is well thought out, and that's why he is an icon.
We suddenly feared sleeping. Not to mention we had a keeper of our nightmare. The horror movies were big, but in the 80s, these characters were absolute superstars. At any given Halloween of the mid-80s, you could see a myriad of Jason, Freddy, Michael Myers costumes. Furthermore, kids of the era feared various levels of daily life and associated these faces to go with those fears. Afraid of suburbia? Michael Myers may actually be the star of what you're afraid of. Afraid of a camp or the woods? Jason may be the guy you were dreading. Freddy wanted you to forget his face because your own subconscious could play out anything you were afraid of. However, Freddy was always the star in a nightmare, his home turf. Never mind the fact that he was a walking, talking, anti-smoking ad. Even if you didn't want to think about him, there was a chance that he'd just pop in just for shits and giggles because you associate him with dreams from there out. When horror gets huge like this, as it was in the 80s, minor characters had mild success that would be considered massive success in lull times like we have today. Characters like the Leprechaun, Hellraiser, Chucky the Doll, all manifested certain fears, but were a level below the big three. For a couple of reasons, but it didn't matter. The sheer choice gave these secondary characters a shot. Unfortunately, people got greedy. If these characters were all owned by the same company, it would certainly be worth a shot to try and produce an Avengers-type horror film with all these characters in it, and the film would have no problem making over $100 million. The fact that that sentence is believable is why, for the sake of horror, this needs to happen again. Horror films in general can be good for a weekend win at the box office, maybe a $30 million success. But when you have superstars, heroes of horror in the film, you could bank on multiple weeks of success, doubling your investment, merchandising, and other things that are normally associated with big budget action adventure films. How would you market Paranormal Activity? There's nothing to sell. Getting back to the point, in the early to mid 90s, we were starting to get into another lull with horror. Wes Craven, the very guy who brought us Freddy Krueger himself, tried to reset the trends in horror. He used the reality/character mix again for his next horror icon, but this time he used 2 parts reality to 1 part character. The film was 1996's Scream. The issue with the villain is, spoiler alert, it was not one person in the outfit. And for the series, it was an interchangeable set of villains throughout the series. The structure was strong enough, but we couldn't lean on our hero because, well, they were never the same person. And that too, they were just people. Nothing extraordinary, just people. Lee, you want to tell us about the next lull?
Absolutely, CP. And thank you, good sir. Welcome to part 2 of Horror Needs a Hero. I'm Drumdums, and I'm going to be your host for the second half of this extravaganza. I love this idea, too, of talking about slasher icons. My favorite genre in horror is the slasher genre. So as you know, CP just provided you with this huge in-depth analysis from the dawn of horror with Frankenstein, and he took you all the way up to Scream. So now, my job is to take you from Scream all the way to now. Maybe we can dig deep and try to dissect what is going on with the slasher genre, why it kind of comes in and comes out, and still there's really no huge horror icons since Freddy, Michael, and Jason. Before I get started, I want to talk about this book right here. If you love the slasher genre, then you definitely have to check out J.A. Kurzweil's The Slasher Movie Book. It covers all the slasher movies as far back as, I believe, Peeping Tom in 1960, and it goes all the way to the Millennium Slashers. As you can see, they have a full section on Halloween. They devote like 4 or 5 pages just to Halloween. And then they talk about probably 100 obscure slasher movies that I guarantee you've never even heard of. And as you can tell, there are tons of great pictures and illustrations. It's definitely a page turner, especially if you love the slasher genre. So definitely check out this book, The Slasher Movie Book.
I don't know if Lee's trying to imply that he's the reader in this group, but I brought a book for show and tell too. So my portion of this video is kind of a Cliff's Notes of this book, Horror Cinema. It's basically the history of horror and extensive looks at the genre from its beginning all the way through when this book was made in the early 2000s. And it's rather extensive. Like I said, my footage was Cliff's Notes. I didn't even talk about sci-fi horror. That's in here. So you have the Xenomorph from Alien, Godzilla. So like that's another thing that we didn't get into.
So now we're going to talk about Scream. Why was Scream such a big hit? I believe Scream was lightning in a bottle. It was a conglomeration of 4 or 5 different things that all met up perfectly. First of all, the timing. Slasher films were all but dead before Scream came out. Drew Barrymore, of all people, when she got the script for Scream, she thought, this genre has been out for quite a while and I think it's going to make a comeback. So she jumped all over that, and I think she was totally right. The slasher genre was ripe for an awakening. And next you got the story. The story was so well done. It was really hip and creative, and it had a really, really great surprise ending. I mean, Scream was a lot of fun. It's probably one of the best modern slashers ever, or post-80s slashers ever. Still to this day, I can watch that first Scream movie and just have a blast. And also, Scream paid homage to the horror icons before. This movie made reference to every cool horror movie, so all the older horror fans loved it, they could relate to it, and then it was also new and fresh. It had this new hip audience. All the newer horror fans, they ate it right up. Now the problem with Scream though is history repeated itself. You had quite a few new slasher movies or knockoff slasher movies that wanted to capitalize on that success, much like what happened after Halloween came out. After Halloween came out, I believe there were around 80 slashers that tried to capitalize off the genre, and no holiday was safe. You had movies based on New Year's, you had movies based on Valentine's Day. Some of the more popular slasher films that came out after Scream were I Know What You Did Last Summer and Urban Legend, and both those movies had sequels of their own. So when we're talking about icons, I think one of the reasons those movies have been all but forgotten is because the actual slasher in those movies isn't really memorable.
It's a difference between, why Freddy and Jason are so popular, but Scream is not.
The mask itself is not really scary at all.
Scream is an empty mask. It's a mask with, spoiler alert, with revolving people inside that outfit. It takes away from the mask itself when the person behind it is not the same person. It's not the same entity. It's a revolving character. It's a revolving set of characters. Another reason why Saw, for all intents and purposes, is sort of a slasher, except he's like in the same room. That's another reason why Saw doesn't have that. Saw has a draw. Don't get me wrong, you don't make 6, 7 sequels without having some sort of draw. But the thing was, it was different people. There were different people doing different things. There's nobody to cling to. It was a niche. But when you have a character that is shrouded in mystery, when the characters aren't super extravagant like a Frankenstein, like a Dracula, like a Wolfman, the mask is what intrigues us. We want to know what's going on behind the mask. We want to know about the character inside the mask. Why are they wearing that mask? What's going on back there? And it's when people run around and don't have any sort of mystery to them and there's realism to them that we don't have any sort of intrigue. The WWE learned this about their wrestler Kane. Kane, for all intents and purposes, was a horror villain in the wrestling world. And he had a mask. There was intrigue, there was a lot of interest in his character. Then he took his mask off and he's just some guy now. If you go back and watch wrestling when Kane, the wrestler, was with a mask and after he took it off, there's different vibes. The not knowing is what drives a lot of people, what makes us come back.
I mean, I Know What You Did Last Summer, it's a guy with a hook, but you don't see his face. He's just got a hoodie on. And The Killer in Urban Legend looks pretty similar. Some other little slashers that came out after were 2002's Valentine, where you had a guy that had a Cupid mask on. But again, it's a Cupid mask. It's not scary at all. I actually enjoyed that movie, but I can see why it doesn't have an iconic status. And a lot of these movies fail, and as a result, they don't get a sequel. And as you know, all the famous horror icons, they all get sequels. So as a result of all these failed post-Scream slasher movies, then we had slasher fatigue. And because of slasher fatigue, I believe a new subset of horror started coming into play. You had quite a few different genres that were actually pretty popular. And the market actually got pretty saturated. You had zombie films, ghost stories, torture porn, found footage, and even vampire horror. Ghost stories were the first set of films that really started getting popular. And I believe the first one that really did this was The Sixth Sense. This movie was another really well done, well directed horror movie, and it attracted a lot of the more mature audiences. Everybody remembers Haley Joel Osment and the I See Dead People. And that movie grossed something like almost 300 million domestically. It was huge. And so everybody was trying to capitalize off the ghost stories, and it seemed like the slasher movies were kind of forgotten around that time. But I gotta say, there were some really creepy scenes in that movie. And what's really shocking is it was PG-13, and it made audiences aware that you don't necessarily have to have an R-rated film to be scary. So suddenly we had a lot of ghost stories and haunted house stories, and the problem with this is only 10-15% of them are really good. Another one was The Others with Nicole Kidman, which kind of had a similar twist. Next we had a re-emergence of the zombie genre. And this is a genre that I really love because it's just a lot of fun. You can infuse a lot of cinematic elements in it, like comedy and drama, and of course horror. Of course everybody knows George Romero made the Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, but it seemed like in the 90s the zombie genre was kind of dead. Along came the 2000s, and this movie called 28 Days Later came out. And it took the zombie genre and it kind of put a new spin on it with the rage virus. It was scary as hell. And then you had the Dawn of the Dead remake, which was also a really well done remake, one of the few really good remakes, because really all it took was that basic storyline of a bunch of victims in a mall and they're having to deal with zombies, but everything outside of it was quite different. than the original Dawn of the Dead. It's a lot more fast-paced with a modern edge. And then next we got torture porn, or that's what I like to call it. Torture porn got really popular because of Saw. The first Saw came out. It's probably the lightest of torture porn. I mean, compared to other horror movies, it's pretty nasty stuff. But compared to other torture porn type movies, it's probably one of the mildest. But it's, again, a really, really well done movie with a hell of a twist at the end. It's a fun movie. The first Saw is great. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. And then after that, you had Hostel, which the first half of the movie felt like softcore porn, and then the second half of the movie was just torture, and it's kind of hard to watch. And it's a genre that I didn't see lasting too long. You had the Human Centipede that came out a few years ago, and you know what, guys? I've never even watched the Human Centipede. Just after hearing the premise of it, I have no desire to watch mouth-to-ass horror movies. That's pretty much what I gotta call it, mouth-to-ass. And then we had vampire horror. The Underworld movies kind of kicked this off, because the Underworld movies are kind of a mixture of action and horror, and maybe even a little bit of sci-fi in there. But the cinematography in those movies is just really intoxicating. They're actually a lot of fun. The last Underworld movie, not so much, but I actually like the first three. And those movies really made Kate Beckinsale a breakout star. It was kind of a mixture of The Matrix and The Crow. I remember seeing the first poster for the first Underworld when it came out, and immediately it got my attention. I was like, I want to see that. Haven't even seen a trailer for it. Looks amazing. But the movie that really brought vampire movies into the mainstream was Twilight, and I'm not talking anymore about that shit. But then Let the Right One In. That is one of the greatest vampire movies, or vampire horror movies I've ever seen. And what was so cool about it was little kids, and little kids can be really creepy in horror movies. And I thought the plot was really interesting, and I love how they finally showed what happens when a vampire comes into somebody's house uninvited. Creepy as hell. And finally, found footage. Everybody remembers the Blair Witch Project. This is a movie that came out in 1999, and it was made for around, I believe it was something like $25,000, which is astonishing. And it ended up making somewhere around $150 million. And it became the most successful independent film of all time, breaking the original Halloween's record. And this was pretty damn impressive. And I remember seeing this movie, and it's amazing what you can do with just a small amount of money and a camera, and you can still entertain your audience. The Blair Witch Project was definitely a lesson in what can scare you by what you don't see. Because you don't see the Blair Witch through the whole movie. It's about what's in your head that's scaring you and what you don't know. But then after the Blair Witch, you had so many found footage movies. I just reviewed The Gallows not too long ago, and almost all of them are just pure crap. The only one besides the Blair Witch Project that was good was Paranormal Activity, the first one. And I'm not gonna lie, the first Paranormal Activity is creepy as hell, especially at the end. Getting back on topic, talking about slashers, I believe one reason why the slasher movies have kind of taken a downfall is because of all the damn remakes. They are remaking everything now. Even the old bad slasher movies, they're remaking. Just to name a few, we've had remakes of Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, House on Sorority Row, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, My Bloody Valentine. I could go on and on. Most of them are bad. They're not good remakes. I think writers need to get back to the drawing board, come up with some really creative and original horror icons. Why hasn't this happened yet? I don't understand it.
Lee focuses mainly on the slasher genre. There are many genres that are within the horror landscape. There are seemingly only two genres that seem to get the heroes, and that is the monster genre and the slasher genre. This appears to be due to the extravagance of the characters. People watch certain movies for certain reasons, but films that are unrealistic, films that are nothing like what you experience in life, is what you go back to time and time again. That is where films like monster movies and certain slasher movies have this drawing power. There's nothing like it in life. Frankenstein, there's nothing like Frankenstein in life. Dracula, there's nothing like Dracula in life. Wolfman, Creature of the Black Lagoon, Jason, Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger. Freddy Krueger, technically, you could kind of play with and just run amok with your dreams. But these are extravagant things that you don't experience in life. That is why people dress up as these characters. You do, but you don't have as many people dressing as Norman Bates. Norman Bates represents something that could actually happen. We don't want to be reminded of what we can experience in life. The great drawing power to these films, and films in general, these certain films that we watch over and over again, it's a vacation from life. It's a trip somewhere else. We're experiencing something that we want to, that we can't. It's bigger than life. It's a unique experience. It's also another reason why the 2010 version of Nightmare on Elm Street did not work. The version of Freddy that they put in for the 2010 remake of Nightmare on Elm Street looks like a burn victim. Granted, you could say that for the 84 Krueger, but it was extravagant. He looked like something from hell. I mean, it looked like a burn victim, but like on super steroids. The 2010 version looked like a burn victim, and for some of us, that represents something that we know. We do not want to be reminded of everyday life. We go to these movies, we watch these movies over and over again to have an escape from life. If somebody has a friend who has a burn issue, they're not going to go and watch the 2010 version of Nightmare on Elm Street. They could watch the 84 version because of there's that separation. Granted, it's based on a certain story, but there's that line of extravagance to stand behind. 2010's Nightmare on Elm Street, they blurred the line, and it was too realistic. When we want to escape, we don't want to experience realism, we want to experience escapism. We watch movies like this because we want to be intrigued. We don't want to be reminded of life. We want to escape life.
Now, does that mean there aren't some good original slashers out there? No. There are definitely some good ones. I'm going to name off a few of them for you. You're Next. You're Next is a really cool and inventive slasher movie. And the killers all wear these animal masks. And again, I think the reason it's not iconic, at least not at this point, is because, yeah, they can be kind of creepy, but if you watch the movie, the actual heroine takes center stage. And she is pretty much the female version of Rambo. And she outshines the slashers. And that's what made that movie so good. They took a slasher movie and they took a different aspect of it and shined a light on it and made a great film. Also, I think a really underrated slasher movie is The Strangers. You actually had some creepy looking slashers in this movie. They were the threat, the center point of this movie, and every time you heard a loud knock, it was so unsettling. I remember watching The Strangers with my wife. She let out the loudest scream during one of the scenes, and my kids heard it from the other side of the house and they just busted out laughing. And that's a movie that I think they could actually do a sequel to, and it could be really good. And then finally, earlier this year, the movie It Follows came out, and that is one of my favorite movies this year so far. It is so great. Just the concept of it, having sex can cause it to come after you. It is such an enigma in this movie and so interesting, and the way that movie is directed. Go check out my review for It Follows. You'll see what I'm talking about. I fell in love with this movie, and I almost don't want them to do a sequel to it because it's just perfect. It's so good, unless David Robert Mitchell directs the sequel. And lastly, we have what I call the return of the icons. Jason and Michael are returning to the big screen in 2016, hopefully. I actually have news updates for both movies, so you can go and check those out. But just to give you the quick gist, Halloween Returns is definitely going to be a sequel in the original timeline, and it's going to take place after the original Halloween 2. And what it looks like is that it's going to take place in the 90s, which could be really interesting. And then the new Friday the 13th movie that's rumored to come out later next year. There's still not that much information on this movie.
People, they keep trying to remake the Friday the 13th series. Make a prequel. Go back to that relationship. You don't have to, you don't have to veer off from the slasher genre, but if you open up pre-Friday the 13th with like a good 20-minute chunk on that Pamela Jason, just that why they are so close and why they kill for each other, I think you'd get some critics that actually enjoy that. But what do I know? I've only been watching these things forever. They talk about that relationship, and fans have built that relationship, have built on that relationship for them. Yet they keep trying to remake these movies, and they have dozens and dozens of scripts that they just can't seem to settle on.
All I know is that they're definitely making it. I know originally they were talking about making a found footage Friday the 13th movie, and the internet fans just went freaking berserk. The last I heard is they're definitely not doing that. They also talked about doing a Friday the 13th movie in the snow. Don't really know if that's happening now, but I'm really looking forward to it. So anyway, guys, we did it. That is it. That is the end of Horror Needs a Hero. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed talking about it. Looking forward to getting into the comments on this video. I want you guys to go down there and get a conversation going with us and tell us what you think is the reason why there aren't any modern horror icons. Oh, and before I go, I forgot to mention Sam, this guy from Trick or Treat. I really think that Sam is probably the closest thing we have to a new horror icon. I know that they're actually doing a sequel to Trick or Treat, and I'm hoping they're still doing it. I can't wait. But this is such a cool character, and I love Sam. And just thank you for supporting us. So guys, thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter, and Drumdum out.
Thanks for watching, guys. I'm CP with Will I Like It Reviews. Take care.